Hi everyone, Dave here at East Rosebud Fly and Tackle. We'll continue our series today of tying flies. Today I'm going to tie for you a Jack Cabe. I couldn't find any history on this fly, although it is an older fly and been around quite a long time. I know it's fished locally quite a bit during the salmon fly hatches. It is a typical trude type or downwing fly. This has a bit of a red deer hair tail on it, a very dark dubbing on the body. We're going to use calf tail for the downwing, and then it's a mixed grizzly and brown hackle for the head. So I'm using a 3X long streamer hook, something like a TMC 5263 would work for you. I'm also using a 6/0 thread. This happens to be a brown Vivas thread. And to make sure we preserve room for the head of the fly and the hackling, one trick that I use with my fly tying students is we start the thread at a particular point on the hook shank. That way we don't inadvertently creep up to our head area. So for this, I'm going to start my thread at about the 75% point on the hook. This will leave adequate room to tie off our downwing calf tail and also to hackle. We're just going to wrap a nice smooth thread base right to the end of the shank, which is typically right at the back edge of the barb. And I'm just using some dyed red deer hair for the tail. We don't need very much for it. We do need some. And like any time you use any deer or elk hair, clip the bunch off from the patch and make sure that you clean out the short hairs. I like to grab the ends about a third of the way down from the tips and then simply just pick out the insulating fuzzies, we call them, and any of the short hairs. This hair will not stack unless it's nice and clean. I always start with a little bit bigger bunch than I think I'm going to need. It's always easy to pick out a few extra fibers after you've stacked it than to try to add to it. So I'm going to put these tipped down in the hair stacker. Give it a few noisy wraps here, just to straighten the tips like so. Oh, this is a little bit more than I want, so I'm just going to peel off a few of the fibers here. We want the tail to be about hook gap in length, maybe just a little longer than that. It's a fairly short tail. We'll get our tie-in point. Make 2 loose wraps of thread over that. Don't let go of the butts. Pull down. Make a couple of more tight wraps to make sure it's secure. Now I go ahead for the flotation qualities and to build up bulk on the abdomen. I go ahead and continue using this deer hair by simply spiraling the thread through it a few times, a lot like we do with a simulator, to the shank. Then we'll trim off the butt ends. So this adds a little bulk to our abdomen so we don't have to use quite as much dubbing, and it adds a little bit of element of flotation to it as well. We'll get these butts wrapped. As you see, I'm not going past our initial thread start-in point, which is a 70%. Bring our thread back almost to the tail. For dubbing, I'm using this SLF squirrel dubbing. It's a dark brown, chocolate brown color. I like it not only because of the translucence in it, but it's also a nice fiber to dub. It does have some spiky squirrel fibers in it and a little bit of antron, not too much. And as always, we want to dub thin so that we have control over it. Of course, the thickness is somewhat affected by the type of dubbing you use. Dry fly dubbing will dub much tighter than scud dubbing or squirrel dubbing like this, but still we don't want to have big clumps. We can always add to it to try to even out. The reason I stopped short of the tail is so when I wrap back, my dubbing actually starts where I want it to, instead of having a bunch of thread. Trying to wrap a fairly even abdomen here. You can bulk it up a little bit as you go forward. This will help to stand our down wing up. Continue adding dubbing, overlapping what you already had on the thread. This keeps the dubbing nice and consistent in diameter. So as we go towards our 70% point, bring that dubbing up to a slight taper. And again, that will help keep that down wing out where we want it. Now I'm going to continue forward with the thread just to make a thread base, or we'll never get this calf tail secured. For the down wing, I'm using white calf tail, primarily for the visibility. Some of the commercial ones that we get have more of a light tan calf tail, which is good too. I just simply couldn't find the color that I want. And calf tail, there's a substantial amount of waste with calf tail with short hairs, so you want to make sure you get a pretty good bunch. Stand it straight up away from the tail and then cut it off. And just like with any other hair, we're going to hold it about 1/3 of the way down from the tips and clean out these short hairs. The short hairs do nothing but add bulk to our tie-in. Since they're short, they're not going to be the length of the wing that we want, and we don't want any excess bulk in the tie-in. Calf tail is hard enough to tie down. It's not a hollow hair, it's a solid hair, and it's very, very slick. So make sure that you've picked out as much of the underfur as you possibly can and the short hairs. You can see I'm holding it up very near the tips. Calf tail simply will not stack unless you have it clean. Now if you cut it off properly, you have a fairly even tip on this. I could probably tie this in as it is without stacking, but I'll show you how you can even up the tips. Same way in your hair stacker, just funnel the tips down. Make sure that the entire bunch of hair is below the rim of the stacker. If it's too long, bring it back out and cut some off. If there's any hair sticking up above the stacker that your finger is going to touch, that hair will not stack. So make sure the hair is the proper length. And it takes more stacking with calf tail. Alright, pull it out and check our length here. It's not unusual to have a couple of hairs that simply won't stack. If you have a couple that are just obnoxiously long, go ahead and pull them out. So we're going to measure this wing to come to the end of our deer hair tail, like that. Grasp it at that portion. I always spin my thread clockwise to cord it up, make it tighter, and make it stronger. Pinch the calf tail with the hook on top of the hook. Make a couple of soft wraps and pull straight down. Use your index finger on the far side and your thumb to ensure that this does not slip and slide around the hook shank. So you want a tight band of thread. Then I'm going to cut these butts off at an angle. Since we are going to hackle this, we do want as close or as smooth of a transition as we can. Anytime I use squirrel hair or calf tail hair, which is slick, I always add some head cement or a little bit of super glue to the tie-in point. Again, this helps to keep this hair from rotating around the hook when we do the last series of steps, which will be the hackle. So before we tie in the hackle, we want to smooth this slope out with thread. One of the worst possible conditions to wrap hackle is on a down slope towards the head, simply because the hackle wants to slide off towards the head. So we try to smooth that out as best we can. This is a mixed hackle of grizzly and brown. I'm using saddle hackle simply because it's so much longer. And I'm just going to place these hackles back to front, marry them as we say. It makes no difference the order. Make sure you size them first for the correct size of the hook. And this is the size 10. Get the butt ends even, the hackles overlapping each other. And while I'm messing with this, my Zap-A-Gap is drying. And then once you have them laying one on top of each other, go ahead and strip off about a ½ inch of hackle from both of them. We want enough stem that we can tie it down all the way to the back of the eye. I'm laying these shiny side up towards me on my side of the hook, and I'm tying this hackle in right at where the bare stem begins, just shy of that, and then nice firm thread wraps. Smooth out your underbody here. So the hackles are on my side of the hook like this, ready to wrap. We're going to take both of them together, stand them perpendicular to the hook, make the first wrap right up against our down wing. Keep your hackles together. I like to slant them backwards a little bit as I wrap to keep them from wanting to slide forward. Sometimes you have to get in with your scissors point, kind of tap the hackle to get it together, because it will want to go down this slope. Alright, we're going to tie it off, leave room for a thread head. 2 tight wraps here, clip off the butts, and then use our fingers, try to get a few of these back and cornered and make a nice smooth thread head. And then we'll whip finish and apply a little head cement. Of course, these can be tied in a variety of sizes to simulate different sizes and species of stoneflies. So here's the Jack Cabe. Say it's an oldie but a goodie. We use it often in our freestone streams around here for salmon fly hatches. A lot like the stimulator, tied in different colors. It could also be useful as a hopper pattern. Tied in smaller sizes, it could also be useful as a caddis fly pattern. Haven't tried a Jack Cabe? Give it a try. As always, thanks for joining in, and we'll see you next time.